Welcome to Sightings. I'm Tim White. The wide open spaces of Nevada are the perfect testing ground for the U.S. military's top secret weapon systems and aircraft. So it's not unexpected that people who live there often report seeing unidentified flying objects. But the UFOs that have been sighted most recently are unique.
You could see that it was definitely a spheroid-shaped object and that it was surrounded by this very energetic field that would lag behind the maneuvers that it would make.
We stopped on this ridge, and my partner looked at me. His eyes were as big as fish bowls, and he motioned for me to look back over our shoulders to the east. I can't say for sure what we saw was of this earth.
Area 51, Dreamland, Groomlake. This UFO-rich area has many names, unless you talk to the military. Despite high-level leaks about top-secret aircraft testing here, with codenames like Aurora and Black Manta, the Pentagon continues to issue their standard denials, even to Congress.
Every time that there's a story about Aurora or the TR-3A Black Manta in Popular Science or the New York Times or something else, Congress calls the Pentagon on the carpet and says, what's the deal? They want to know if these planes exist. And every time they've asked about those planes, they've been told there is no such thing.
The military's established a pattern of denial concerning these highly capricious wild aircraft, beginning in the late 50s and continuing to this day.
The pattern of denial started with the U-2. In the 50s, sightings of strange cigar-shaped craft were followed by leaks about a new spy plane, codenamed U-2. The military denied the existence of any such plane, until Francis Gary Powers was shot down over Russia in a U-2. The pattern continued in the 1960s with the SR-71 Blackbird, in the 70s and 80s with the stealth fighter and the stealth bomber. And now, in the 90s, it's happening again. There are new sightings of disc-shaped craft, new leaks suggesting the discovery of an anti-gravity device, and the same old denials.
There's a certain conceit, I think, among journalists that, well, if it's real, if it's true, we can get it, because Washington, the government, the Pentagon, they all leak like a sieve. Well, that may be the attitude in journalism, but if you ask military folks, they will tell you secrets can be kept. Secrets are kept.
Many believe the secrets are kept here, at this supposedly non-existent Nevada military base. Rumors suggest that anti-gravity technology being used here was actually recovered from an alien spacecraft.
I think there's a strong possibility that we have recovered some sort of alien technology and are trying to incorporate that into military programs.
In an attempt to penetrate the security net around Area 51, investigators Michael DiGregorio and Roger Johnson pedaled a backcountry route. Suddenly, a series of red-orange objects flared out across the sky.
They started at great height, seemed to descend, and then flared out. It was startling. Then a series of silver pewter flashes went directly across the horizon at terrific speed. One of these silver flashes went directly up into the air. The bottom one seemed nearly to hug the ground.
Did DiGregorio and Johnson witness the super-secret testing of a new kind of aircraft? In fact, someone did think they saw too much. As they returned to base camp, they were detained by a security patrol that seemed to be protecting more than just a stretch of arid landscape.
Boom. Headlights come on. There was an M16 pointed at us, and here we were faced with a life-and-death situation. But we also knew that we had crossed the line back into public domain, and therefore we were safe.
3 months later, in the same area, independent investigator Mark Farmer saw the same orange-red UFOs. He had a camera and captured these images on film. As an aviation expert, Farmer was stunned.
I saw the object exhibit entirely unconventional flight characteristics. At times it would wobble around in the sky and appear very unstable. At other times it would be in a rock-hard hover. It was an oblated sphere, multicolored, crimson on bottom, blue-green on top, much brighter than anything else in the sky.
Is this photographic evidence of the military's latest experimental aircraft? The answer isn't likely to come from the Pentagon.
Let me put it this way. I don't think the military has any credibility with the public in terms of its denials of this program or that program. They've denied the U-2 existed. They denied the SR-71 existed. They denied working on stealth. All of those programs suddenly were unveiled.
The only information at this point comes from leaks within the government structure. Bob Lazar, an aerospace engineer formerly assigned to Area 51, claims the government possesses at least 9 disc-shaped alien craft currently warehoused in Nevada.
I was part of a back engineering group, and our job was basically to look at these recovered discs, and I say recovered because I don't know really where they came from, whether they were given to us, we found them, shot them down, who knows what. But our group basically was to back engineer them, which means to start with a finished product and go backward and see how it was fabricated and try and duplicate some of that technology with earthly materials.
To me, Bob Lazar is credible. Over the past couple of years, I've spoken to literally dozens of people who have worked at that facility out there in Nevada. I think the technology at Area 51 originally came from somewhere else.
They were looking at something that, as far as Bob is concerned, didn't come from this planet, and they were trying to figure out how it worked.
John Andrews is also considered a reliable source for information about government projects. He has an amazing track record for revealing aircraft projects before their official unveiling. He's not a military officer, nor an aerospace engineer. He's a product designer for a toy company called Testor, and he can't keep a secret.
Secrecy is used oftentimes to hide the details of the funding and the size of the program. More often than not, it doesn't hide a real, true technological secret.
The Pentagon was not amused when Testo released a replica of the F-117A stealth fighter before it was officially known to the public. The recent release of their Project Aurora model is also making waves. Why is a toy company the public's best source for information about military projects?
They have sources throughout the military, they have sources in companies like Lockheed and Northrop, and they get bits and pieces of information from here and put it all together.
With such a remarkable track record, what's next on the Testor drawing board? John Andrews says it will be this, a UFO replica called the Sport Model.
In the case of the UFO model, we've made every effort to make it correct and to make it accurate. We've made every effort to find out the best information on the subject. We went to people who said that they have worked on the craft.
Could the Sport Model really be the next step forward in military aircraft design? Testor says yes, and the experts are listening.
The Testor Corporation has been very lucky in terms of building models that suddenly become real planes, but it's not luck. Now they're telling us that they believe that flying saucers at Area 51 are a real possibility.
This model may be the very, very first authentic plastic scale model kit of something that was designed and built and flown from another planetary system. I cannot say that that is absolutely certain, but there is that possibility.
Next on Sightings.
Perhaps the most controversial subject we investigate on Sightings is alien abduction. More and more seemingly credible people are coming forward, claiming that they've been abducted, probed, and manipulated by aliens. And now there's a new pattern developing. Supposed abductees are returning from their experiences with a cautionary message for us all.
There's a new, frightening chapter in the abduction story. Many abductees are claiming that their alien captors send them home with apocalyptic predictions about life on Earth. It's a terrifying conclusion to an already horrible ordeal.
I'm on my back on the bed, and she's at the foot of my bed, and she's doing something to me.
We had this flashback of being on this table, being surrounded by these beings.
I don't know what she was doing. She had some sort of an instrument in her hand.
Little gray guys with big dark eyes, and one of them's putting a needle in my neck.
Until recently, the story would end there. But now abductees are returning with more than horror stories. They feel they are intergalactic messengers who must deliver dire predictions. This new mission intrigues Harvard professor John Mack. This Pulitzer Prize-winning psychiatrist at Cambridge Hospital is now treating people he calls experiencers. In his new book, Abduction, Mack presents 13 case histories.
I thought this is crazy. I mean, I thought this is not possible. I'd seen many, many cases and worked for 2 years before I said, look, there's a mystery here. I can't explain this. There's something like what they're saying seems to be happening to them.
You actually have seen them in your room in bright sun daylight. What did you see?
Currently working with over 100 patients, Dr. Mack's clinical approach gives abductees a chance to talk openly about their experiences.
I would have experiences that were so real, that were so lucid, they were every bit as real as me talking to you now, and yet I would dismiss them because they were so out of context.
Joe is a successful businessman from Massachusetts who's had abduction memories since early childhood. He kept these experiences to himself until hearing about Dr. Mack's study. His abduction history is outlined in Mack's book. It's a detailed chronicle of otherworldly control and painful medical experimentation.
They would put something up my nose, and it was very disarming. And yet, there's that sense of almost a split self, because there's a part of me that's terrified and doesn't understand, and yet there's this other part of me that they've already explained the procedure to and why.
Over time, Joe's abduction experiences have changed. In an extraterrestrial version of the Stockholm Syndrome, he has less fear and has begun identifying with his captors.
Once they begin to come to terms with their terror of the trauma, the experience tends to transform. They feel they're somehow connected with these beings, and they experience the beings themselves as closer to the source, which is a term they use very often, or home.
It was the most profound experience of my life.
But that kind of profound transformation does not happen in every case.
The first being that I ever saw consciously in my entire life was sitting right here.
Diane, a software test engineer, is also a patient of Dr. Mack's. She's documenting her encounters with these watercolor pictures.
This picture was in the fall of '92. It took place here in the house, and I woke up, started to pivot around, found I couldn't move, and something released, and I said I could move. I scanned the room, just about to give up, and I see a small gray female being sitting there just waiting for me to spot her. And then she, I don't know whether she flew or what, but she sure came across the bed fast, right up to my face, and steered right like this.
Although the experiences don't fit our notions of reality, there's no reason to believe that they're not telling the truth, or that something occurred to them that is real and they're telling it truthfully.
To corroborate these personal beliefs, Dr. Mack searches for parallels among abduction stories. The most common thread, and ironically the most extraordinary, involves reproductive experiments.
Sperm samples taken from the men by a cup put over the penis, some kind of vibratory energy that causes an ejaculation. Eggs taken from the women. Something is done between the egg and the sperm, which may be reimplanted in the woman in a subsequent abduction. Then that will be taken, the fetus will be taken from them at a later time. That's their experience.
I flew out the window like a sucking, vacuumed out feeling with all the air pushed out of me. I ended up on a craft, laying down on a table. And next thing I know, I see a child. One of those ugly little gray things is holding a child up. And I said, no, that didn't come out of me. At the end of that experience, I blacked out and came to standing on this platform. And I was not home anymore. I was somewhere else. I don't know where this was. I felt like I was on a ship.
The emotion is so appropriate to a real experience. Dreams don't operate like that. Fantasy isn't like that. Trauma displaced from some of the sources isn't like that. It isn't just a traumatic story. It's a complicated, consistent narrative that operates clinically altogether like a real experience.
The complicated, consistent narrative Dr. Mack's patients describe always has a beginning, middle, and most recently, the same exact ending. Before they are returned home, the abductees are warned about an impending apocalypse unless all people on Earth drastically change their way of thinking.
We are told that the human experience, the human race, as we have known it, is becoming, or soon to be, non-viable, not extinct. It can't survive. My own sense of it, and this is like purely speculative, is that we are also being given a choice to change our ways. In other words, we were here to shepherd or steward the earth, or be responsible for a higher consciousness. And what we've become so far from the Creator, so distant from the source, that we have treated the earth like it was our property, and we are apparently a malignancy at a cosmic level now.
The message is, wake up, grow up. The sandbox that you're littering is not your own, that you are not alone, that you don't need to feel the sense of isolation and separation that you have felt, that you're part of a bigger community.
According to a recent Roper poll, 1 in 50 American adults exhibits at least 4 out of the 5 most common symptoms reported by alien abductees. That's a staggering statistic, because it seems to indicate that 2% of our adult population is experiencing something for which no one has a conclusive explanation.
Next is NASA.
In 1976, the Viking mission to Mars sent back the first high-resolution photographs ever taken of the Martian surface. And since then, 2 additional missions have attempted to get even closer, but both have failed. In 1990, a Russian Mars probe named Phobos disappeared. And in 1993, a U.S. probe, the Mars Observer, met a similar fate.
The unmanned Mars Observer carried some of the most sophisticated equipment ever sent into space. The Observer's mission was to conduct a comprehensive photographic survey of Earth's nearest planetary neighbor, Mars. But while on approach to the Martian surface, the Observer failed. Curiously, one area the probe was supposed to be photographing at the time was a controversial region called Cydonia. Pictures taken in 1976 seemed to show artificial structures in this area. Just when the observers seemed to be moving in for a closer look, NASA said, technical malfunction, no more pictures.
It's quite possible that NASA knows more about anomalous structures on Mars, possible extraterrestrials, even structures on our moon, that they're not telling us about.
There is sufficient evidence to indicate that some of the objects on Mars may possibly be artificial.
NASA's position is that nothing has been constructed on the surface of Mars. The face and pyramids that appear in the 1976 pictures are just tricks of light and shadow. But these computer-enhanced 3D images seem to disprove NASA's claims. They show that the face on Mars is clearly visible, no matter where it is in relation to the sun.
I was quite interested with the first photos and release of the face on Mars. But particularly I thought it was interesting the pyramidal structures. That some of these pyramids appear to have even a central stairway running up and down them. The more we look at these structures, the more we can see that there's something amazing here.
Some researchers believe that NASA is withholding important photos and data taken in the Cydonia region. They suggest NASA created the observer malfunction story to hide what could be the greatest archaeological discovery of all time.
If some people want to go far beyond the edge of what's accepted in terms of imagery, see patterns on the rocks of Mars or on the moon or in the rings of Saturn, my view to that is mazel tov. Go ahead, do it. Try it out, make your proposals.
Stan McDaniel is a retired professor who has conducted an in-depth study of the Mars structures. He is intrigued by the seemingly deliberate placement of the face in relation to the pyramids.
These objects, if you measure carefully from the tops of the 5 that surround this city square point, you find an almost perfectly symmetrical pentagon.
If NASA does have new information about these reportedly artificial structures on Mars, why are they hiding it from the public? An advisory report from the Brookings Institution, a Washington, D.C.-based think tank, may hold the answer.
There is a section on what might occur if evidence of extraterrestrial existence was found on other planets. They said that NASA or the government might want to consider keeping the information from the public. The reason being that it could cause widespread social unrest and possible deterioration of government control.
The official NASA position is that there is no cover-up. They insist Mars Observer suffered a catastrophic electrical failure, rendering it inoperable.
it did not lose transmission, they turned it off. And they turned it off after the instructions for going into orbit had been uploaded to the spacecraft. It was possible then that the spacecraft would go ahead, follow out those instructions, and go into orbit.
Before we start saying how these rocket scientists messed up, and they did mess up, we have to keep realizing just how tough these projects are. That we're doing things out there in space every time we do it that no one even thought was possible a few years or decades ago. These are really incredibly tough missions to accomplish.
The debate may end in 1996, when NASA plans on launching a new Mars probe. This may be the second chance ufologists are hoping will prove the existence of an ancient civilization on Mars.
In addition to the formations on Mars, one research group is studying what appear to be strange structures on the surface of the moon. This photograph of the lunar surface shows two geometric shapes. The circle could be a crater, but the triangle seems unlike any other naturally occurring formations that we know on the moon. On a recent Sightings episode, we brought you information about the possible destruction of a Soviet space probe called Phobos by a UFO. Well, now, for the first time on American television, startling footage obtained from our Russian sources showing the unidentified craft that may have destroyed Phobos.
In 1989, the sudden disappearance of Phobos 2 had ominous overtones. Now, Russian officials close to the space program feel free to offer their own theories about the satellite's demise.
Phobos 2 was supposed to enter the Martian sky and descend to an altitude of 15 meters. Phobos 2 was sending back pictures, as usual when suddenly the last picture from Phobos arrived. On that picture you could see Phobos, the Martian moon, and an oblong-shaped object. The object cast a passing shadow on Mars, and then Phobos 2 disappeared.
Scientists from around the world have studied the last photograph transmitted by Phobos 2. The oblong image shown here has been estimated to be at least 25 kilometers in length, nearly 13 miles long. Many believe that Phobos 2 photographed an immense alien craft. Now, nearly 4 years after the disappearance of Phobos 2, this footage, shot by a Japanese astronomer, may help explain the mystery. The footage shows a moving object, casting a shadow on our own moon's lunar surface. It appears here on American television for the first time.
We have not rejected the possibility that a spacecraft took Phobos 2. There is footage of a craft of a great length that flew over the lunar surface at the speed of over 200 kilometers per second. Can you imagine that? A huge space station moving that fast? I believe this is an immense UFO mothership, which may have taken Phobos 2. It's frightening, in fact. The day before Phobos 2 was launched, the senior designer of the project received a phone call. A steely male voice said, "Don't launch Phobos 2, or it will be destroyed by a large saucer." We all got a cold chill from this warning.
Could there be an immense UFO traveling through our solar system, ready to destroy any and all satellites that get too close for comfort? It is indeed a very chilling thought.
If you photographed or videotaped what you believe to be a UFO, or if you've experienced any type of paranormal activity, our Sightings investigative team wants to know about it. Welcome to Sightings. I'm Tim White. Tonight, UFO experts who conduct serious research have a whole vocabulary to describe their formative science. One term you may not be familiar with is flap. A flap occurs when UFOs appear in waves over a specific area for a specific period of time. The appearance of flaps has sinister overtones for ufologists who believe these recurring sightings have a secret and perhaps deadly agenda.
All around the globe, there are certain places that seem to act as natural UFO magnets. These areas are attracting flaps, or waves of UFOs, that may last for years. There are hotspots in Russia, Europe, and in South America, the heavily populated city of Sao Paulo has had hundreds of sightings by thousands of people. These flaps have prompted researchers to try to find a common pattern or motive.
Anybody who studies this soon becomes almost desperate to understand a pattern or to impose some purpose on the phenomenon.
In the United States, sightings are widespread and occur almost nightly. America's #1 hotspot is Gulf Breeze, Florida. Ralph Fuller's sighting in 1988 was among thousands of others, but Ralph was the first to capture a UFO on tape.
I don't know what that is out there over the Gulf, but we just had a real bright light. I think it might be a flying saucer.
They seem to spawn one another. The two went to 3 and 4, and ultimately, over a matter of maybe a couple of minutes' time, there were 10 of these lights out over the Gulf. And they seemed to be in some semblance of a formation, but still in all, there was no movement whatsoever, no noise, no sound, nothing of that sort. You see nothing but the Gulf of Mexico. The nearest point of land would be the Yucatan Peninsula. And there were no boats or anything of that type in the area either.
These are sky watchers, amateur UFO enthusiasts in the Gulf Breeze area who go out almost every night of the week with cameras and binoculars in search of UFOs.
What makes a good sky watching area, for one, is a good field of view. That is, being able to have an unobstructed view of the skyline, and ideally you'd like to be away from city lights, but that's not always possible. So we go out in the evening and take our chances, and you may have a relaxing evening out under the stars, and then you may be blessed with a sighting. We just never know. We've seen amber-colored lights, 8 lights in a perfect circle gliding and performing maneuvers in the sky. We've seen rows of lights suggesting lights perhaps around the periphery of a craft.
There are UFO hotspots all over the country. Gulf Breeze, certainly, but also here in New York State near a little town called Pine Bush. And the hotspots here near Pine Bush, according to one scientist, have a very special meaning.
Bruce Cornett is a geologist who lives near Pine Bush, New York. After numerous significant sightings of UFOs near his home, he began studying the area with an electromagnetometer.
What I found is that these magnetic anomalies are in specific patterns. And all of the UFO activity, the landings, the sightings where they are taking off and landing, when we've been able to identify specific areas, are associated with these magnetic anomalies.
Are you suggesting that nature created homing devices deep in the ground?
No, I think that it's a reverse. If we are dealing with an alien culture and they are doing something underground, they're using the natural magnetic anomalies to disguise their own magnetic signals.
Are you saying there are, or could be, aliens in the Earth?
I'm not saying it's certain. It is definitely possible, based on what I've seen.
Do you realize how that sounds?
I don't like the idea just simply because it is so outrageous. Then I would have to also add some of the photographic data that I have that shows, at least in one particular case, a UFO going up at a 7-degree dive right down into the ground, what appears to be.
Ellen Crystal has been investigating the Pine Bush Flap since the early 1980s. In her book, Silent Invasion, she documents hundreds of UFO encounters in the area. Working independently, her findings seem to coincide with those of Bruce Cornett.
These ships kept coming back to the same fields night after night after night, the same places in the woods. Also, we had experiences where we clearly heard somebody drilling in the woods at night, and this is private property. It seems that there's something being constructed underground, such as an artificial installation of some type.
One of the most well-documented sightings in history occurred in Pine Bush on August 6, 1992.
We think in excess of 1,000 people may have seen 2, 3 ships or 4 ships where I took video. And all the police departments across the whole lower New York State area was simply inundated with just hundreds and hundreds of calls.
We looked over the top of the trees, and there was this object there out of nowhere. This great big object. It was about 300 foot wide, the size of a football field hanging over your head, and about 300 foot off the ground.
We looked at our clocks, and we had 3 battery-running clocks, 2 in the kitchen and 1 in the living room. And for some strange reason, all 3 clocks were stopped at the same time.
Just about everyone in Pine Bush has seen a UFO. In his barbershop, Butch Hunt hears a lot of stories from eyewitnesses about strange alien encounters.
About 60% of the people around here, I think, have seen something. And some talk about it and some don't. They're just afraid to talk about it. Afraid of ridicule and intimidation. The one that we saw was over Red Mills Bridge. And there were 6 of us in the car. But it just so nice. It just glided right over the trees. And we just got out and stood there. Just gawked at it. And nobody said a word. But the whole episode was probably 30 seconds. But it was huge. It was bigger than the bridge.
UFOs are cited by all kinds of people, including the most credible professionals that you can find. In addition, when we have multiple witnesses who all tell the same story, then we can say, well, that's probably a pretty good report. If we have enough detail in a given report that we can rule out all of the normal explanations, it's not the planet Venus, it's not the aurora borealis or a meteor, it's not an aircraft that we can name, then we are talking something fairly credible.
No one disputes that there have been unidentified flying objects sighted around the world. Where ufologists and skeptics differ is in how they interpret these sightings. Some skeptics believe that all UFOs are really conventional aircraft, while others see a deliberate hoax. But just how common are UFO hoaxes, and how do the experts weed them out? Each year, there are more than 10,000 UFO sightings reported in the United States alone. Many of those sightings are documented on film or videotape. But how many of these sightings are genuine, unidentified, and unexplainable flying objects? Sightings has received hundreds of photographs, films, and tapes of supposed UFOs. The experts we use to analyze these reports are very careful in determining what they consider to be credible.
UFO photographs that are hoaxed are hard to do. When there are hoaxes, we can find them.
With the use of sophisticated equipment, expert UFO analysts try to methodically separate fact from fantasy, genuine UFO from obvious hoax.
There's some basic techniques that are used to hoax UFO pictures. Overlays, pace-up, small models, optical technology, electronic technology. In fact, the library is full of techniques on special effects.
Many videotaped images appear genuine, but careful analysis and scrutiny often prove otherwise. This tape received by Sightings was analyzed by Dilatoso.
This is a good example of a very well done, well executed hoax of a UFO. You'll notice here on the edges that the edge here, this edge, this one, are all the same number of pixels. When they are very similar, as they are in this picture, it indicates that it's a small object close to the camera. Point of the story, this is a model.
First of all, they're all potential hoaxes to begin with. So if the picture looks too good, it probably was staged.
Now that cameras are in the hands of the general public and most everyone has one, we are finding that there is an increase in the availability of videos of UFOs. You can't just say, oh, this is a hoax. As a scientist, it's your obligation to finish the question and the answer. If it is a hoax, how did they do it?
When I first got into this, I used to think that there was considerable hoaxing. But over the years, I've discovered that there's a whole lot less hoaxing than we assumed, and that the situation is probably reversed. Maybe 20% are deliberate hoaxes perpetrated by somebody for some purpose of his own, and maybe 30% are misperceptions. And the rest seem to be real unknown to me.
We have to thank the people that do hoaxes because they help us understand the other side too, and what purposes there may be in real UFOs coming here. It's a tremendous mystery we're trying to solve.
Despite careful analysis and overwhelming evidence, there are some people who refuse to believe in the existence of any space encounters. Case in point, there are still people who are dedicated to proving that Neil Armstrong's moon landing in 1969 was a hoax, staged, they say, by Hollywood.
Coming up, what sinister alien force is mutilating America's livestock?
The sex organs have been removed from the animals, and all without blood.
Our exclusive UFO report continues next.
Sightings are the only potential evidence of alien visitation. Ufologists believe the Nazca lines of Peru and crop circles are also forms of UFO communication. Now, after more than 20 years of study, some experts believe further proof of extraterrestrials on Earth can be found in the bizarre deaths of cattle.
The cut on her jawbone was just real sharp, precise cut.
A large incision, removing its sex organs, rectum had been cored out, tail cut off.
Her milk sac had been cut out on the left side in an oval about the size of a basketball.
It's a mystery that remains unexplained after 30 years of investigation. Some claim alien forces are responsible. Others claim cult activity or secret government testing. Cattle mutilation. The most recent outbreak appears to have been in a 3-county area of northeastern Alabama. Over 50 cases of mutilation have been reported in just the past 6 months. Organs appear to have been removed with surgical precision. So far, the farmers in the area have lost more than $40,000 in livestock. With such tremendous losses, the police department in Fife, Alabama, has launched an intensive investigation. Ted Oliphant is a Fife police officer who has personally investigated more than 30 cattle mutilation cases.
We're finding the same thing over and over again. The sex organs have been removed from the animals, the tongues have been cut out of them, the jaw's been stripped into oval, clean to the bone, and all without blood.
Who or what is responsible for the seemingly ritualistic slaughter of these cattle? Researchers have little to go on beyond these decomposing carcasses. And despite attempts to prove that a sinister force is at work here, some experts believe the mutilations are all the result of natural causes.
It leads us to think maybe that animal is getting mutilated, but what's happening is predators, vultures, are also involved with that process.
The indication that the predators are not responsible for these animals being cut on is the evidence of high heat at the excision, evidence of high heat in excess of several hundred degrees or more, according to the pathologist who studied the tissue samples.
That pathologist is Dr. John Altschuler. He has studied suspect cattle tissue for the last 4 years.
The tissue at the incisional areas is very firm and very hard and looks burned. And the microscopic evidence clearly indicates that heat has been applied, and predators, to my knowledge, cannot do that. Here we have a photomicrograph taken of the hide from an animal where we've had evidence of burning. The arrow shows a pink color to the tissue underneath the lining of the hide. As we move towards the cut area, you notice a definite color change from pink down here to blue up here. This is a very typical change of exposure of tissue to heat.
Other unusual evidence has been found at some alleged mutilation sites. A white flaky substance was recovered from one Alabama location. Officer Oliphant had it analyzed at one Eastern university.
And they determined that it was composed of aluminum, titanium, silicon, and oxygen. Aluminum and oxygen, or aluminum oxide, is what's used in the styptic pencil that I use if I've cut myself after shaving, and that stops bleeding. Perhaps that has something to do with why the animals don't have blood on them at the excision lines.
In more than half of the Alabama cases, farmers report seeing an unmarked helicopter leaving the scene just before or after a cattle mutilation.
I had a chopper in behind my barn. Had all my cattle rounded up in behind the barn.
The chopper, when it appeared, it was kind of unordinary. It looked like it's sitting on a box, you know. Of course, it was big enough to get a cow in, you know. If they catch them hovering over their cattle and pasture, I'd probably shoot him. Probably shoot him.
Loud helicopter noise, sounded like it was right over the trailer. Went out the front door, went over to my car, returned the seat, pulled out a handgun. I walked towards the edge of the trailer. I saw the helicopter. There's a light blue helicopter, no markings, no numbers, and it was hovering about 15 foot above the tree. I dropped my holster, and the helicopter veered off.
I think the greatest mystery of this case is the lack of physical evidence that we found at the sites. Only in one case did we find that white flaky material. We haven't been able to find footprints, we haven't been able to find tracks or wheel marks or anything to indicate that anybody's even been in there. How do you explain that? We can't.
My tendency to believe is it's something of a lot higher intelligence than what we've got in normal everyday occurrence around here.
Don't really have any ideas who could be doing it or the reasons behind it, you know. You could get most of the parts they removed from a slaughterhouse for free, you know.
Yes, sir, I run a meat processing plant, and I made a statement that I would donate them jawbone, the blood, their rectum, and whatever, you know, if they just asked me for it, and then they wouldn't have to kill these farmers' cattle like they do.
Despite the willingness of the ranchers to cooperate with authorities in a larger-scale investigation, most government officials are sticking to the predator theory. They do not believe that high-tension lines in the area are somehow related to the mutilations. They also deny charges that the government is mutilating cattle in order to support new technology, replacing human blood with bovine blood. And what about the unmarked helicopters? Do they point to the existence of a conspiracy?
I think the helicopters are doing the same thing we're doing on the ground. I think they're investigating who's doing this. They're trying to find out, too. And because of their behavior, it's obvious that they'd rather have us think that they're doing it than what's actually happening.
Whoever or whatever is responsible may never be known. The silent testimony of these mutilation victims has not been able to resolve the mystery. One of the most intriguing aspects of our investigation is what we didn't find. The moment our sightings team arrived in Fife, the mutilations stopped. Did our presence scare someone or something away? Or was it merely coincidence that our investigation coincided with an end to this bizarre phenomenon?
Coming up, can life exist in outer space? A bizarre growth discovered on a satellite brought back from space has scientists back.
Team as conventional aircraft, atmospheric phenomena, or hoaxes. But there are some that defy explanation, even by the experts who make it their business to study UFOs. Tucson, Arizona. Topeka, Kansas. Bellevue, Wisconsin. Gulf Breeze, Florida. Branford, Connecticut. New Boston, New Hampshire. Kanazawa, Japan. Carp, Ontario. Something is happening in the skies above these cities, and it's being captured on videotape.
It was a ship. It was a ship as big as my house.
It was a total feeling of awe and knowing that I was looking at something that I didn't know what it was.
I think there's no doubt about the fact that it's the most dramatic thing and the most astounding thing, the most important thing that could happen here on Earth.
In Branford, Connecticut, George Bennett was videotaping a high school football game when this beautiful sunset caught his attention. But watch what appears unexpectedly on the left-hand side of the screen. In Bellevue, Wisconsin, local TV cameraman Dave Hooker was taping this windmill for a story about a local farm. When he viewed the tape back at the station, this is what he found. Jeff Sino is a video analyst who studies hundreds of tapes of alleged UFOs every year.
Here you can see an object moving behind a windmill here. Right there, it disappears into a cloud just before It goes behind this windmill. Clouds that day were at 25,000 feet, cirrus clouds. You know where the camera was put, you know the distance to the windmill, you can determine its size by looking at the image size here. Go through some trigonometry, and you'll find out that that UFO was about 10 miles away, up at 25,000 feet, and the size works out to about 500 feet long and doing 14,000 miles an hour, which is, again, nothing that a conventional aircraft is capable of doing.
Gulf Breeze, Florida has been a UFO hotspot for more than 6 years. Resident Bruce Morrison has made 177 sightings since 1988. On September 2nd, 1991, Morrison was out with a group of friends when he recorded this object with his home video camera.
Oh, look, it's brighter, brighter. There's another one. Oh, look at now. Who is that? Look, 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 drop. Look, 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 look. Yes, it's white again. There it goes. White again. Yo, look, it's right there.
Just drop something out, Gary. We had it drop these little objects out, and they would go out at an angle from the red object we were looking at, stop and turn red, and we would have two red objects sitting there.
It gives you the impression of sometimes of fireworks. Sometimes it looks like a string coming out with a white ball on the end of it.
These startling videos are due in large part to the home video revolution. The proliferation of UFOs on tape has analysts working overtime, including Robert Nathan of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
My feeling is the majority of the people who see something at night in the sky are telling a legitimate story in the sense that they certainly believe what they're seeing. But there's some people who are actively performing hoaxes, and it's a very difficult thing to separate these people.
This is a rare daytime sighting recorded in Kanazawa, Japan. A shiny, reflective disc descends rapidly, then suddenly, with tremendous speed, the disc shoots off at an acute angle. Watch closely as the camera zooms in. The outline of a saucer shape is unmistakable, but is this a true UFO or an optical illusion created by the sun? On August 19th, 1991, in the town of Carp, on the outskirts of Ottawa, Ontario, an anonymous videotaper shot some of the most compelling UFO footage ever recorded.
In February of 1992, I received a rather unusual package in the mail, included a videotape and a series of documents. It was postmarked from the Ottawa, Ontario area without a return address. The documents and the label on the videotape made reference to an individual by the name of Guardian as the author.
The videotape shows what appears to be a disc-shaped object landing in a field behind the house of Diane Labinek. She was an eyewitness to the phenomenon.
On my property, I've seen lots of bright flames. They were not like spreading fires. There were more individual flames going extremely high and a lot of smoke. I saw